Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. We are from Group 7, consists of 5 members, which are myself, Irdina, Amar Ismail, Nas Maisara, Naiman Izzuddin and Nurul Ashikin. The topic that we are going to present is about Islamophobia, understanding anti-Muslim sentiment in the West Country. Islamophobia has been the topic of intense debate in both contemporary culture and the academic community. There are many different forms of Islamophobia, including the exclusion of Muslims, be it in public or private spaces. There have been discrimination against Muslims on the basis of religion in the workplace, including the banning of hijab and prayer, and the negative portrayals of Muslims as violent, misogynistic, and untrustworthy. For your information, Islamophobia has undergone a radical change during the last couple of decades, especially after the terrorist attacks incident on September 11, 2001. In the beginning, it was just an emotional release. Now it is more like a political ideology promoted by the right-wing extremists who want to attain power by generating widespread hate towards Islam and Muslims. On top of that, there has been a rise of white supremacy in the United States since Donald Trump was elected president. Racism has been widely accepted as an acceptable political and social position. Attacks on places of worship and racial tension in a public and private setting are two results of the rise in anti-Muslim hostility that have been seen among many minority groups. Nevertheless, secular forces are also accountable for indiscriminate acts of defamation, despite the fact that right-wing forces are in charge of the majority of activities involving the spreading of Islamophobia against Islam and Muslim for both religious and political purposes. In the view of these realists, Islam is a backward religion that is opposed to freedom, democracy and human rights. It also degrades women, it is intolerant of and antagonistic towards minority groups, and it degrades the elderly. They believe that Islam poses an existential threat to the modern Western way of life and the democratic system, and that this ideology must be fought with all their might.
I will continue with the perspective of the West country toward Islam. Islamophobia is the perspective of extreme fear and the hostility of the West countries toward Islam and the Muslim. The Islamophobia in the West keep rising and uncontrollable against it. There are few incidents occur in the West and that related to Islamophobia and threaten the Muslim in the West. This harassment is unavoidable as the perspective of the West government toward Islam as terrorists. Next is the cultural differences among the West countries and the Islamic countries that being the catalyst of this wrong perspective and the bias toward Islam. This can be seen by the rhetoric of certain extremist speakers based in Western culture, laying credence to stereotypes about Islam and the Muslim. The inherent connection between Islam and this condition is fueled equally by the state of backwardness, illiteracy, authoritarianism, and political struggle. Combined, these causes have contributed to the misconception that Muslims in the West are unable to assimilate. However, the West majority of Muslims in this nation have been making positive contribution to the economic and the social development of their host cultures. Therefore, enriching the cultural variety that is the cornerstone of gaining multiculturalism. Next, as we can see that US is the main West country that had bad perspective toward Islam. Besides that, the United States has lately seen a climate of extreme disorder due to the fact that Islam has been identified as a significant public enemy by the former government of President Trump. Executive order protecting the nation from the foreign terrorist entry into the United States temporarily had barred entry to the citizens of several Muslim majority nations. Besides that, after the US, there is the countries from the Europe that actively providing back perspective toward Islam. In addition, to the previously mentioned causes, there are other social issues inside Europe that have fueled anti-Muslim racism. These are mostly attributed to issue of self-doubt, slowing economy, rising unemployment, and a declining population. Europeans suffer from an identity crisis that they blame on the immigrant in general. With the Muslim taking the lion's share of the blame, this is likely due to the striking contrast between the cultural and religious legacy of Muslim and that of European cultures. As the Muslim population in the West grow, whether via natural increase or immigration and the European population shrink, Christians in Europe worry about the future of their Christian identity in Europe, and the extremists exploit this worry by pointing the Islamic demographic time bomb that they say will forever alter Europe culture. Thus, Islamophobia has emerged not as a statement of hostility to Islam, but rather as complicated type of hatred to Muslim as a religious group and immigrant group, or both. We need to follow Qatar in their FIFA World Cup previously. They had teaching and showing to the West country that Islam is not a terrorist. They have been provided what the teaching of Islam toward the West country. Therefore, we can reduce Islamophobia by following that way.
As we know, Islam is the second largest religion after Christianity in the world, and the Muslims are the fastest growing ethno-cultural minority communities in the Western world. However, the regrettable fact that Muslims, especially living in a Western country, have increasingly become the victim of a contemporary form of racism, that is Islamophobia. Therefore, I will explain what are the factors that increases the fear and hatred towards Muslims, and how those Western communities make a blanket judgment toward Muslims through the concepts of realism. First, domestic securities are driving Islamophobia because of religious, political or ideological terrorism that involve in violent and frightening activities. The government can regulate. Since the incidents of the Christchurch attack, the UK government has not defined Islamophobia to combat anti-Muslim discriminations in the West. So the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government spokesperson stated that the APPG's approach would severely restrict the free speech, which this confirms that realist theory stated that state has the right to employ all measures required to eliminate any potential threat to its political and institutional survival, as the ministry is trying to safeguard security by rejecting the APPG proposal because it will restrict freedom of speech. So, because of this, Islamophobia has not stopped being enforced even until today. Second, the security issues and how ethno-cultural elements may experience Islamophobia in the West. So, the realist view of the security issues stated that Islamophobia is now a sort of ethno-cultural conflict caused by driven security reasons, which is founded on hope state of nature of domestic anarchy. A man is forbidden to do that which is destructive to his life or takes away the means of keeping it, and he must not to do that which he feels is best keeping for it. So which in states of first law of nature. This means that a person should always try to stay alive and safe. So since radical Muslims have attacked Westerners in the past, which scare group are trying to keep them safe by sticking it to an Orientalist worldview that view Islam as a threat. So because of that, the rise of Islamophobia in the West is result from historical relationships that shape how different ethnic groups see the identities and actions of one another as threatening or not threatening. So as an example, people's ideas about Muslims have changed a lot since the 9/11 terrorist attacks, which the horrific jihadist attacks in London, Paris, Brussels and Barcelona have made Westerners fear Islam, and Muslims, because of extremists, have exploited Islam to attack them in the past. Leaders can also instill fear and uncertainty between rival groups to maintain their power, which fosters ethnic strife. Come to the questions, what is their plan? So the leaders will likely to use fear and uncertainty to maintain control and justify violence. So to achieve their political and economic goals, the leaders seek to derail the peace process. So due to the economic security issues and elite manipulations of voters' anxiety about their safety, so the leaders may exploit fear and uncertainty to avoid losing power and develop support for violence. So for instance, new Austrian and French leaders Sebastian Kurz and Emmanuel Macron are restricting Muslims under the pretense of fighting political Islam to attract voters. After winning the elections, they enacted Muslims' right restricting laws. This is because the radicals' murder of Samuel Paty, the French president, enacted stricter measures against Muslims and Muslim groups, while Austria wants to prevent Muslims immigrations from bringing radical Islam to their countries. So the Austrian president used the law to expel 60 of the 260 Turkish imams present in Austria and close 7 mosques. So consequently, his policies have aided in fueling a rise in Islamophobia across the Western countries.
Gesellschaften, der politische Islam und Radikalisierungstendenzen, die haben in unserem Land keinen Platz. Wir dürfen Ihnen heute bekannt geben, dass es eine Entscheidung des Kultusamtes gibt, die dazu führen wird, dass in 7 Moscheen der Betrieb untersagt wird. Es bedeutet die Auflösung der Moschee der Grauen Wölfe und zum Zweiten die Auflösung der arabischen Kultusgemeinde, die insgesamt...
Next, Muslim extremists join terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which increases the West's Islamophobia by recruiting people to hurt combatants or non-combatants. So according to the realist view, they convince other people to bomb public locations or commit suicide to survive as secret groups and spread violence. Thus, terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS that use Islam to advance their political goals try to persuade Muslims to embrace them by portraying themselves as an alternative to the corrupt system as they oppose. So as an example, the horrible things they did in Paris and Brussels shows how a terrorist group can use religion like ethnic nationalism or philosophy to make people in the West more afraid of Muslims and more interested in the East. These terrorist organizations also receive official assistance and finances of military-backed terrorist acts to achieve economic, political or ideological aims, increasing terrorist assaults. For example, Iran founded and armed Hezbollah. Therefore, the US declared the state supporter of terrorism. Thus, this will make more people think that Islam is where terrorism comes from. In conclusion, the idea of the realist school of thought let us see the factors that contribute to the rise of anti-Muslim sentiment in the West. These factors include the security issues, the ethno-cultural security challenge, manipulative leaders, and the role of terrorist groups. So the true fact is that the brutal actions of terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda using Islam as a reason to make people more afraid. However, the Western countries, which are seen as liberal democracies that should support ethnic cultural freedom and equity, are home to communities of peaceful, innocent Muslims who are becoming a target of growing hatred and bigotry.
Next is the incidence of Islamophobia in West countries. Islamophobia impacts more than just a tiny portion of Muslims. There have also been a number of incidents throughout the world involving Islamophobia. Here, we are focusing on incidents that happen in West countries. We separate the incident into 2 parts. The first one is incidents that resulted from Islamophobia, and the second one is incidents that can contribute to Islamophobia. The first incident that resulted from Islamophobia is Christchurch mosque shooting that happened in Christchurch, New Zealand. On 15 March 2019, located in Christchurch, New Zealand, a total of 51 people were killed when Friday prayers were held in 2 different mosques. 2 mass shootings had happened was carried out by a lone shooter who entered both mosques during Friday prayer, began at the Al-Nur Mosque in the Riccarton district of Riccarton at 1:40 p.m. and then he proceeded at the Linwood Islamic Center at 1:52 p.m. There were 51 deaths and 40 injuries in total after the massacre. Brenton Harrison Tarrant, a 28-year-old from Grafton, New South Wales, Australia, was arrested as he was trying to drive away to the 3rd mosque in Ashburton. According to media reports, he is a white nationalist. Prior to the incident, he also live-streamed the first shooting on Facebook and published it as an online manifesto for white supremacists. Both the video and the document were later banned in New Zealand and Australia. Recently, on March 26, 2020, he pled guilty to 51 murders, 40 attempted murders, and participation in a terrorist attack, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in August. This is the first such sentence ever happened in New Zealand. The second incident is in Norway, which is the Oslo bombing. Oslo bombing is one of the deadliest incidents ever happened in Norway after World War II. On 22 July 2011, neo-Nazi Anders Behring Breivik carried out 2 terrorist attacks on the government, the civilian population, and a workers' youth AUF summer camp, killing 77 people and injuring hundreds more. The first attack is at Oslo, within the executive government quarter of Norway. He placed a bomb inside a van next to an apartment which resided the office of Prime Minister at that time, Jens Stoltenberg. Less than 2 hours later, at a vacation camp on the island of Utoya in Tirfjorden, Viken, the second attack was launched. The camp was organized by the AUF, the official Norwegian Labour Party's youth wing. Breivik boarded a ship to the island wearing a handmade police uniform and phony identity. He then opened fire on the attendees, killing 67 and wounding 32. This incident was the deadliest single-person mass shooting ever happened in contemporary history. Before he going to the attack, Breivik sent an email titled 2083, a European Declaration of Independence to 1,000 people. He stated that his philosophy, as well as why he carried out the attack, using anti-Turkish, anti-Muslim and anti-Islamic slurs in his manifesto. The next part is the incidents that contributed to Islamophobia. Here we have one incident, and this incident we think that everyone must already know what incident it is. It is the September 11 attacks, or people call it as 9/11, that happened in United States. In morning of 11 September 2001, a coordinated attacks have happened in United States which involving two important buildings in the United States, World Trade Center WTC and the Pentagon. WTC is a busy financial district center while the Pentagon is the headquarters building of United States Department of Defense. 19 militants linked with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 planes and carried out suicide assaults against their targets, which WTC, the Pentagon, and one more, the Federal Government Office. 2 of the planes collide with the World Trade Center Twin Towers in New York City, while the third one collide with the Pentagon in Arlington. The 4th plane failed to hit their target as the people on board fighting against the attacker. The plane then fell in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Almost 3,000 people were killed in the 9/11 terrorist attack, which sparked massive counter-terrorism programs in the United States. With 343 deaths and 72 deaths of firemen and law enforcement respectively, it remains as the worst terrorist assault in human history and the single deadliest incident for firemen and law enforcement officials in US history.
Moreover, let's move on to the second last part of this presentation, which is the impact from the Islamophobia, understanding anti-Muslim sentiment in the West. As we all already informed from the definition of Islamophobia itself, which is an extreme or illogical dislike, animosity or terror of Islam. It supports unfavorable stereotype which lead to intolerance, discrimination, and the stigmatization of Muslim or Islamic activists from social, political, and civic life. According to the briefing meaning from the previous statement just now, will somehow make us as a human think that from the general side of view is that we can see how far Islamophobia will give impact either individually, society, or country itself. There is a various impact that came from Islamophobia. One of the impacts generally will lead toward more discrimination, especially on religion. Discrimination could happen in a lot of ways, and Islamophobia is one of the type of the discrimination towards religion. In the sense of view, discrimination against religion is unacceptable because the person is Muslim, they were treated unfairly. This is because I could say that this is much worse than we think due to the involvement of the life of the person itself, such as education, employment, political participation, and service to the society. Furthermore, apart being individually affected, Islamophobia also will give impact towards society in terms of violence, especially when it comes to the women's society. For your information, being woman in Islam in the West country that has no majority of Muslim is a big challenging for women to survive. This is due to the some of the country that making the rule and regulation to prohibit of women for wearing headscarf. The violence happened when society tried to pick a fight when they saw Muslim women still wearing their headscarf, which this will lead to bullying, especially when they were in school. Moreover, the impact of Islamophobia is psychosocial impact. If we look at the incident of the mass shooting incident in New Zealand, it creates a mass trauma around the world. Many studies say that the incident is proof that lead to a psychological effect because from the start of the incident itself, which came from the live streaming on social media during the Christchurch attack, which exposed a wider and repeated audience including kids and teenagers. Last but not least, we assume that ethnocentric is also one of the impact of Islamophobia. This is because ethnocentric is when someone believes that their people, tradition, culture, religion is better and choose not to accept others' culture. Which there is study saying that individuals with the view of ethnocentric are more likely to have the feeling of prejudice towards Muslim. This is because media social play an important role. Unfortunately, the negative side from the social media itself is by portraying the terrorist assault, which making society are not seeing the real view of the Islam itself.
As for recommendation, there are ways and hopes to fight Islamophobia among people in the West country. First and foremost, people must educate themselves about Islam and its practices. By acknowledging Islamic practices, it will allow them to perceive Islam for what it really is, rather than how it is portrayed in the media, which tends to present Islam as religion that promotes violence. Secondly, they need to build ties with members of the local communities. Then they will have the first-hand experience of what it really like to be surrounded by people of the Muslim faith if they choose to act in this manner. Lastly, to counter the widespread belief that Muslims represent a threat of the Western way of life, values, and culture, it is important to put attention on the numerous positive contributions Muslims make in daily life. In conclusion, Islamophobia is pretty much quite strong among those living in Western countries. Indeed, the effect of a false and damaging picture of Islam that has been brought up by the medias as well as politicians is a very powerful force. The Western world's growing hostility toward Islam or Islamophobia has reached an unbreakable surface. As we know, there have been several incidents on how Muslims are treated, such as most shooting that happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the bombing in Oslo, Norway. They may not realize it, but the level of terror that they experience when they are surrounded by Muslims is comparable to or perhaps exceed the amount of fear that Muslims experience when they live in the nation that is hostile towards Islam. That is all from our group. Thank you.